marriage equality the law of this land could be overruled. Just a day after we celebrated Coming Out Day nationally, stripping LGBTQ individuals of what Justice Kennedy memorably called equal dignity in the eyes of the law. This is what I believe is at stake with this nomination. Judge Barrett, you will be deciding cases that have real daily impacts on the lives of millions of Americans. They deserve to understand why President Trump nominated you and what consequences your decisions may have on them and their lives. I've heard my Republican colleagues say all they care about is finding a future justice who will apply the law as written, as if all this is about today is an abstract fight about interpretive methodology and jurisprudence. They seem shocked we're talking about what the Supreme Court might do if Judge Barrett were to become Justice Barrett. And Judge Barrett, I'm not suggesting you made some secret deal with President Trump, but I believe the reason you were chosen is precisely because your judicial philosophy, as repeatedly stated, could lead to the outcomes President Trump has sought. And I think that has dramatic and potentially very harmful consequences with regards to the election, the Affordable Care Act, and long settled rights. This is what I intend to lay out this week, and this is what I hope the American people will hear in the course of this confirmation hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Coons. For planning purposes, I think I talked to Senator Feinstein. We will go to Senator Hawley, Blumenthal, and Tillis. We'll take a 30-minute break to grab a bite to eat and take a little bit of a break and come back and finish up. So,
good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett, welcome. It's good to see you again.
They should not confirm this bitch.
To you and your family as well. I see that some of your children are getting a break. They've earned it, I think. I'm amazed as I've been watching. I've got two little boys at home, my wife and I do. I can't believe how calmly your children have been sitting for a couple of hours. So maybe you can give me some tips.
She's going to send them back to Haiti as soon as she can.
When we're finished here. You know, we've gotten to read a lot about your family in the last few weeks. We've gotten to read a lot about you in the press, and in particular about your religious beliefs. One attack after another in the liberal media, one hit piece after another, many of them echoed by members of this committee, like this one, for instance, Barrett, long active with Insular Christian Group. We've read stories about your Catholic lifestyle, stories about how you raise your children, stories about how you adopted your children, stories about your Catholic doctrinal beliefs, over and over and over, questioning whether you have, I guess, the independence to be a judge, a justice on the United States Supreme Court. And it's not just in the newspapers, it's members of this committee, including the Democratic nominee for Vice President of the United States, who has questioned past nominees who have come before this committee about their membership in Catholic fraternal organizations like the Knights of Columbus. And for those watching at home, that's right, you heard me correctly. Senator Harris and others on this committee have repeatedly questioned judicial nominees' fitness for office because of their membership in the Knights of Columbus. The ranking member, when you were last before this committee, Judge, for your initial confirmation,
who's there? Who's
the
watching
ranking
with
member
me?
referred to your Catholic convictions as dogma, that's a quote, that lives loudly within you, picking up the very terminology of anti-Catholic bigotry occurred in this country a century ago. She wasn't alone. Other senators on this committee last time asked you if you were an Orthodox Catholic.
Who's watching?
One senator said she worried that you would be a Catholic judge if you were confirmed because of your religious beliefs, I guess, as opposed to an American judge, as if you can't be both a devout Catholic and a loyal American citizen. And it's not just you, Judge. Other nominees who have come before this committee for years now have been asked by my Democrat colleagues over and over their views on sin, their views on the afterlife, their views about their membership statements of Catholic organizations, about their membership in other Christian organizations, and on and on and on. And let's be clear about what this is.
Oh, Reese, how you doing?
This is an attempt to broach a new frontier, to set up a new standard. Actually, it's an attempt to bring back an old standard that the Constitution of the United States explicitly forbids. I'm talking about a religious test for office. Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States.
Thank you very much.
Before we even get to the Bill of Rights, Article 6
what are your thoughts, Reese?
of the Constitution of the United States says clearly, and I quote, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Now, that was big news in 1787 when it was written, and it's worth remembering why. It's because no country, no republic in the history of the world had ever guaranteed to its citizens the right to freedom of conscience and religious liberty. Every other country that had ever existed tied together the religious beliefs that would be approved by the powerful and the right to serve in office or to vote or just to be a citizen. In every other country across history, you had to agree with what those in power agreed with in order to hold office or be a citizen in good standing. You had to sign a particular religious confession, or you had to disavow a particular religious group, swear not to follow the Pope, for instance. You had to pledge allegiance to the God of the city or the God of the empire. This was true from 18th century Britain all the way back to ancient Rome. And so when our founders put Article 6 into the Constitution of the United States, they were making a very deliberate choice. They were breaking with all of that past history, and they were saying in America, it would be different. In the United States of America, we would not allow the ruling class to have veto power over your faith, over what Americans believed, over who we gathered with to worship and why and where and how. No, in this country, the people of the United States would be free to follow their own religious convictions, free to worship, free to exercise their religion, and people of faith would be welcome in the public sphere. They'd be welcome there. They'd be welcome without having to get the approval of those in power, like those on this committee. They would be welcome to come to bring their religious beliefs to bear.
Should they confirm this broad or
on
no?
their lives, on their office, and all that they do. So long, of course, as they were peaceful citizens who followed the law. Religious people of all backgrounds would be welcome in public life. And no person in power would be able to control what the American people, any American citizen, thought or believed or who they worshiped. This freedom of conscience and religious liberty undergirds all of our other rights because it tells the government that it cannot tell us what to think or who we can assemble with or how we can worship or what we can say. And that's why Article 6 is there even before we get to the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. But this bedrock principle of American liberty is now under attack. That is what is at stake when we read these stories attacking Judge Barrett for her faith. That is what is at stake when my Democratic colleagues repeatedly question Judge Barrett and many other judicial nominees about their religious beliefs, about their religious membership, about their religious practices, about their family beliefs and practices. That is an attempt to bring back the days of the religious test. That is an attempt to bring back the veto power of the powerful over the religious beliefs and sincerely held convictions of the American people. And that is what is at stake in this confirmation hearing. Judge Barrett is a Catholic. We all know that. She's a devout Catholic. We all know that.
And
she and her husband have chosen to raise their family according to their Catholic beliefs in faithful fellowship with other Catholics. We all know that. Heck, 65 million Americans are Catholics, and many
well, you don't need to think about it? All right, cool.
Are Christians of other persuasions. Are they to be told that they cannot serve in public office? That they are not welcome in the public sphere unless the members of this committee sign off on their religious beliefs?
I don't think anyone's religion should play a factor. It shouldn't.
And the Constitution of the United States flatly prohibits it.
Because you could be a Muslim and be a senator, you could be
the people of faith,
Buddhist,
like Judge Barrett, are welcome in high office, welcome in any office, welcome throughout our public life here in this country. And I would just say to my Democrat colleagues that these years now,
the Democrats are jumping on her back because of all the shit she wrote in the past,
pattern and
all the shit she said
of religious bigotry,
and how Trump said he's going to put through
when you tell somebody
a judge who will strike down the
when you tell them they're going to be a
Act.
Catholic judge, not an American judge, that's bigotry. The pattern and practice of bigotry from members of this committee must stop.
Including yourself.
And I would expect that it be renounced. Now, I just heard my colleague, Senator Coons, make a reference to an old case, the Griswold case, which I can only assume is another hit at Judge Barrett's religious faith, referring to Catholic doctrinal beliefs. I don't know what else it could be, since no one has challenged this case. It is not a live issue and hasn't been for decades. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about, and this is the sort of attacks that must stop. I look forward, Judge Barrett, to getting to the chance to speak with you further about your legal credentials, about your legal views, about your approach to the law and your judicial philosophy. But I hope that one thing that this confirmation process will stand for in the end, I hope when we look back at the confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Barrett, soon I hope to be Justice Amy Barrett, one thing we will say is that was the time, that was the year that the attempt to bring back religious tests for office was finally stopped. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett, and to your family, welcome to the committee. I want to introduce you to one of my constituents, Connor Kern of Ridgefield, Connecticut. He is 10 years old and he suffers from Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It is a horrible, incurable disease. It slowly deprives children of the strength and their ability to move. Eventually, it robs them of their lives. The costs of providing Connor's care are astronomical, but for Connor and his family, it is worth every penny. Connor is a superhero, but he's always had a real sidekick. He's had the protection of the Affordable Care Act. It has shielded him and his family from arbitrary caps on coverage that would have cut off his care when it became too expensive. It has protected Connor from losing insurance because of this insidious disease that he never caused and chose. The Affordable Care Act has given his family a measure of relief, of hope, of peace. They still worry about Connor's health, but not their coverage or its costs. Connor and millions of others like him are white. I will oppose your nomination.
Okay, we got 3 in the building.
Your nomination is about the Republican goal of repealing the Affordable Care Act. The Obamacare, they seem to detest so much. It's about people like Connor, protections for people with pre-existing conditions, tax credits.
She knows she's going to take that shit
that
down.
make health insurance more affordable, bans on charging women more simply because they are women.
Yup.
That's what my Republican colleagues have been fighting to repeal for the last decade. They voted dozens and dozens of times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and they have challenged it twice unsuccessfully in the United States Supreme Court. And each time they failed, but now, just 1 week after the election, as you know, the fate of the Affordable Care Act will be again in the hands of the United States Supreme Court. Republicans have turned again to the court to try to achieve judicially what they cannot achieve legislatively. President Trump has vowed that any judge he nominated would pass the very strong test, his words, and that they would strike down the Affordable Care Act. Judge Barrett, in all honesty, you have auditioned for this job through your academic writing and judicial opinions, and you've passed that test. In fact, you've stated twice in effect that you would have voted to strike down the Affordable Care Act had you been a justice at the time. You've been vetted, you've been screened by the Trump administration and special interests who want an activist judge. They want someone who will legislate from the bench and strike down laws supported by a vast majority of the American people. And that activism uses originalism as a smokescreen. If the American people have any doubts about how dedicated my Republican colleagues are to taking away people's health care, just listen to their own words.
She wants it
They've
gone.
been remarkably candid and forthright. Senator Graham, our chairman, has said, "You can't repair this monstrosity," I'm quoting, "you can't repair this monstrosity called Obamacare. You have to tear it down and start over." Senator Ernst has said, quote, "I support immediate action to repeal Obamacare and replace it." Senator Corner, "It's time to repeal and replace." Senator Tillis, "Repeal Obamacare. Let's end this disaster." And President Trump himself has said, "We want to terminate
Yup,
Obamacare."
he did say it several
Millions
times.
of Americans, more than 130 million, have a pre-existing condition: asthma, heart disease,
Diabetes,
cancer, Parkinson's,
sickle cell,
pregnancy. And now, by the coolest
COVID.
of ironies, COVID-19, the cause of this pandemic, now is a pre-existing condition that could prevent millions of Americans from being covered by health care.
real shit.
Stripping health care from millions of Americans during a pandemic, that's really what is at stake in the Republican lawsuit, now before the Supreme Court, and in this nomination. And sadly, it's not just the Affordable Care Act that's at stake. It's a woman's right to decide when and how to have a family, control over her own body.
Abortion, yup.
An activist judge on the bench doing what
Affirmative
Congress
abortion, you
could
get
not
99
do,
years.
would also strike
Rapists and
down
child molesters get less time.
gun
These are your
safety
Republican
laws.
judges. These are your Republican senators.
Connecticut has been at the forefront on gun violence protection. On gun safety, Judge, you acknowledged that your dissenting opinion in Canner sounds kind of radical. That's because it is. But if your views on the Second Amendment are adopted by the Supreme Court, it would imperil common sense state laws like Connecticut's all around the country. Today, we ought to be working on improving American healthcare.
Yup.
We ought to be fighting COVID-19, which has infected 8 million Americans and killed more than 215,000. We should be producing a national testing strategy, instituting effective contact tracing, and securing sufficient PPE. We ought to be providing assistance to the millions of Americans who have lost their job and face economic hardship and heartbreak. President Trump has failed to do any of it. Instead, he and our Republican colleagues are riveted on rushing a judge through this sham process, dropping everything else. President Trump's failure to act will likely lead to 55,000 additional deaths, 55,000 additional Americans lost over just the next 3 months.
If not more.
Senate Republicans are refusing to address American
Canada got less than 10,000 deaths.
Economic relief.
South Korea probably less than that.
More about putting
New Zealand probably less than that too.
Judge on the bench.
South Korea, New Zealand, Canada, France, Germany, all doing better than the
learned
U.S.
as a senator that there are very few.
I got what, 10 times the damn budget?
Written rules, I should say, in this place. But there is one very important unwritten rule. Keep your word. Republicans have all sorts of excuses for why they are breaking their promise. The promise that they would not confirm a Supreme Court justice during an election year. Each excuse boils down to nothing more than raw political power.
And lies.
They're doing it because they can. But might does not make right. They have boasted they have the votes, but they don't have the American people and they don't have history on their side. The American people want a plan to fight and conquer this disease. They want a plan to put Americans back to work. They want a blueprint for the future, not rolling back rights and turning back the clock. I revere the Supreme Court. I clerked for Justice Harry Blackmun. I've argued cases before the court 4 times. And now I'm really deeply concerned that the Supreme Court is losing the trust and respect of the American people.
Yep.
The authority of the Supreme Court depends on that trust. It has no army or police force to enforce its decisions. The American people follow the Supreme Court's commands, even when they disagree, because they respect its authority. And now President Trump and the Republican Senate are eroding, indeed destroying, that legitimacy. They've stripped the American people of their say in this process simply to confirm a justice who will strike down in court, legislate from the bench, what they can't repeal in Congress.
Shit, ain't that the truth?
Your participation, let me be very blunt, in any case involving Donald Trump's election
Or rhetoric.
would immediately do explosive, enduring harm to the court's legitimacy and to your own
Real shit.
credibility.
Say it again.
Recuse yourself.
Boom.
The American people are afraid.
Stand
and
down,
they're
bitch.
angry, and for good reason. It's a break the glass moment. Americans must use their voices to speak out and stand up, to contact my colleagues on this committee, despite their boasts about having the votes. Stand up and speak out to protect their own health, public health, and the health of our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Get him.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. We will now have Senator Tillis, who's with us remotely. After his opening statement, we will come back at 12:20. And Senator Hirono, you will be the first one to make a statement. So, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. And
She nervous now.
Feinstein. I want to take a moment to honor the life and legacy of Justice Ginsburg. She was a living legend and a giant in the legal world as a professor, as a lawyer, and as a judge and a justice. She was an inspirational model and role model, and we honor her legacy. And I just want to make sure that her family knows the nation mourns her loss. But today we're here to consider a nomination of a highly qualified jurist to the United States Supreme Court, Judge Amy Coney Barrett. She's a top legal scholar, a professor in the mold of the late Justice Scalia. Her work is widely respected in the legal community, and it's clear why her former students voted her multiple times to be the Distinguished Professor of the Year at the Notre Dame Law School. It's also why every full-time faculty member of Notre Dame Law supports her nomination. Her legal work and teaching have inspired hundreds of young lawyers, especially aspiring female lawyers. She's a remarkable mother. She has 7 beautiful children, and in spite of being busy working as a Seventh Circuit Justice, she makes time to be involved in her community. And this nomination is important because it's going to have a lasting impact on our republic. A justice service on the bench involves every important issue facing our constitutional republic. What are the limits of abusive and intrusive government power? What's the proper role of each branch of government? And what are the fundamental protections that our Constitution grants all Americans? These are foundational questions for the Supreme Court, and they consider them every single term. If confirmed, Judge Barrett will be tasked with answering these questions, and I believe she's going to do a great job. But it's not the rights enshrined in the Constitution that's most important.
This shit's been going on since like 9 o'clock.
Itself that ensures our freedom. Justice Scalia understood this. He was
She's not gonna get.
every dictator.
She's gonna have her
president for life has a bill of
decision
rights.
made on the
That's
next
not
week
what makes
Thursday,
us
I
free.
think.
What makes us free is our Constitution. Think of the word Constitution. It means structure. Justice Scalia went on to note the genius of our founding generation is that it dispersed power across multiple departments. The real danger to our constitutional republic is centralization of power in any one part of government. When that happens, liberty dies and tyranny reigns. That's why it's critical that Supreme Court justices maintain the proper role. They decide cases, they don't make policy. In recent decades, the court has drifted towards a trend where it decides majority disputes over policy rather than reserving those decisions for the American people through acting through their elected representatives. People like
All right, I'm going to go for a bit. I got to go use the restroom.
Article 3 judges
Guys, have a
cannot and
wonderful day.
should not be
Talk to you soon.
policymakers. We've heard many speak today about policy priorities that they'd like enacted this court to